I'm Cadet Joseph Bailey. Today I'm interviewing Command Master Chief John Huber, who served in the Navy from 1976 to 2003. Can you tell me about where you were born?
I was born in the city of Alton, Illinois, the same city as my mother and father.
And how was it like growing up in Alton, Illinois?
But we didn't actually live in, I was born in Alton, but we moved to a small town outside afterwards, to a farm. I spent most of my life on a farm, doing all this stuff. I had to milk cows before I went to school in the morning and slop hogs when I got home and baled hay and plowed fields and everything that goes along with a small farm. It was a great life.
Were your parents also farmers?
Well, my dad was the one that, who bought the farm. I don't think it was Mom's idea. I don't know how keen she was on it all, but Dad wanted a farm, so that's where we ended up. And actually, he, in addition to working the farm, he also was a shift worker in a factory as well. So it was very difficult for him.
Do you have any siblings?
I have 4 siblings, 2 older brothers, an older sister, and 1 younger brother.
Did they help you along at the farm? Or
Oh,
your
yeah,
family?
growing up on the farm in those days, everybody pitched in. My sister and I milked cows every morning before we went to school. My little brother was still pretty small. He mowed grass, I think. He didn't really have too much responsibility, but the 2 older boys probably pulled the most of the weight with the plowing and the tractors and helping Dad with maintenance and mechanics and stuff like that.
Did any of your other family members serve in the military?
I come from sort of a military family. My great-grandfather served, my grandfather, my dad served briefly during World War II. He was kind of young. He had just turned 17 towards the end of the war, but he enlisted anyway and served in Hawaii on a destroyer. My oldest brother was in the Navy, is retired from the Navy as well. I could tell you what he did, but then I'd have to kill you.
Okay. Why did you join the military?
I knew I was destined for the military when I was this tall. I didn't know what branch, but I knew I was going to join some branch of the military, and just turned out to be the Navy.
How'd your family feel about you joining the service?
Oh, my dad was all for it. He told me he thought it was probably the best thing I could ever do with myself. We had sold the farm. I think my freshman or sophomore, my 8th or 9th grade, we had sold the farm, so I was just living in town, and we weren't wealthy by any means. We were more on the poor side, so there was no money for college. I wanted to travel. I knew I wasn't going to get any scholarships. I figured the Navy was the best way to go.
Did you want to go to college, however?
I wanted to play football. I wanted to be a professional football player. In order to do that, you have to go to college. But apparently the college coaches didn't want me to be a professional football player because they never invited me to come play. So.
What primary or secondary schools did you attend?
My primary school was that of a construction mechanic, which incorporates any aspect of the construction business. Cranes, bulldozers, pickup trucks, water pumps, anything with more than 2 moving parts, I was going to fix it.
Did you hold any jobs before entering the military?
I had several jobs. My very first, outside the farm, my very first job was as a stock boy in a grocery store. And I did that because I got kicked off the wrestling team. I had just beat the number 3 seeded guy in the state of Illinois. And some friends talked me into going out to drink to celebrate. So I did, and we got caught and promptly kicked off the wrestling team. So I thought, well, can't wrestle, I need to find something else. So a friend of mine was working at the same grocery store. He says, hey, we're looking for somebody. So I started out as at the grocery store. and didn't care for the work too much, but I certainly enjoyed the paycheck. So the next year after football season, I went right back to work for them again, and shortly after that, I started working as a busboy in a restaurant. And from the busboy position, I moved up to a cook, and that's what I was doing when I left for the Navy boot camp.
Which job other than military would you say was most influential in your life?
Oh, by far working on the farm. The work ethic required to be a farmer instilled, I believe, is what made me successful in the Navy. Work hard, play hard, gotta be dedicated.
Was joining the service your goal after high school?
Well, my goal after high school was to travel. Saturday mornings, on the rare occasion when we had the opportunity, we got to watch the Three Stooges. And it would be the Three Stooges in Singapore, or the Three Stooges in Hong Kong, or the Three Stooges in Scotland, or London, or someplace in the world. And I decided early on I wanted to go see those places. So I figured joining the Navy was my best opportunity to do that.
What made you join the Navy over the other branches?
Well, as I said earlier, I knew I was going to join something.
Mm.
And my junior year of high school, my car had broken down, and I didn't know how to fix it. I was a pretty good mechanic, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong with the car on this given day. So I'm getting pretty frustrated, and about the time I'm ready to take a break, my mom comes out to the garage and says, "John, there's a Navy recruiter on the phone. Would you like to talk to him?" And I said, "Sure, I'll talk to him." So I walked in and said hello, and the very first thing he asked me was, "John, how would you like to be a mechanic in the Navy Seabees?" And I said, "Will you teach me how to fix my car?" And he laughed. He said, "Yeah, we'll teach you how to fix your car." I said, "Okay, I'll be right down." And that was it. I borrowed my mom's car, I went down, and I joined the Navy that day.
Where was the location of your initial training?
Initial training would be boot camp, and I went down to Orlando, Florida. I went down there, there were 3 opportunities at that time: Orlando, Great Lakes, or San Diego. But as I said, my oldest brother had been in the Navy as well, was retired, and he had gone down to Orlando. So based from his stories, which mostly involved women, because that's where all the girls went, I think I want to go to Orlando too. So that's what I did.
How long was boot camp for you?
Oh, you know what, that was so long ago, I'm not really sure. I want to say 10 weeks, but I'm not absolute. Was it 8 or 10? I don't really remember.
How difficult was your CB training, and what are some tips you would give to someone who plans to join the Navy?
I didn't think the CB training was difficult at all, because I'd been an athlete all through high school. So combine that with my mechanical aptitude from growing up on the farm, I kind of fit right into the CB. So I thought that was relatively easy, not simple by any means, but relatively easy for me at least. And the advice I would give, I would say mostly comes from me. I was a recruiter for 3 years, a Navy recruiter for 3 years, and the best advice I ever gave anybody was that going to boot camp is the hardest thing you will ever do. It's not really, but that's what I would tell them. Because if they would go down there expecting it to be the hardest thing they've ever done in their life, then they're prepared for it, more mentally prepared for that. And when they get there and it's not that hard, then they write back and they tell their mom and dad and their brothers and their sisters and the preacher and anybody, their teachers, the high school counselors, anybody else they know that, oh, the recruiter told me it was going to be really difficult, but it wasn't. I just breezed right through. And now you're here, so people believe you now. But if you go the other way, if you tell the kids, it's a piece of cake and he's a couch potato and he goes down there and struggles, then he comes back and he tells those same people that I lied to him because he had a hard time. So the best advice I can give is go down prepared for the hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life. Now, in some senses it is, because especially at 17, 18 years old, one of the hardest things you'll ever have to face is the fear of the unknown. And that is stepping on that bus, the initial bus trip to boot camp, because you have no idea what's going to happen to you in life. It's fear of the unknown. You're scared to death, but you do it anyway. That's bravery. That's the John Wayne definition of courage, is being scared to death but saddling up and riding out anyway. Do you know who John Wayne is?
I'm not very familiar with them.
Okay.
What is your most vivid memory of your time during training or while in school? What was the best part?
You know what I remember most about A School was in Port Hueneme, California, which is just north of Hollywood. And one of the biggest TV shows at the time was a show called Baba Black Sheep. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I have not.
Are you familiar with the Black Sheep from World War II? They were a group of American pilots who flew with the Chinese at the very beginning of the Japanese expansion of World War II. And they would actually film the combat scenes right over top of where we were going to school. So we were able to come out on break and stand around and look up in the sky and watch these World War II aircraft doing aerial combat. It was really cool.
What type of other training or schooling did you receive?
Oh, at 26 years on active duty, you do a lot of training. I've had everything from CPR to anger management, time management, mechanics, leadership, public speaking, writing, composition. The list just goes on and on. I've lots and lots of training.
As you said that you were a Navy Seabee, can you tell me what that was like?
It was challenging at times, lots of deployments. A typical CB deployment schedule back in my day was 8 months in home port and then 8 months deployed. 8 months in home port and 8 months deployed. The difficult part about that, it was the 8 months that you were in home port, you were always going to a school somewhere, and then a month out in the field for exercise training. So we were constantly doing away from our families, friends and families, even though we were in home port.
Was it difficult being away from friends and family at home port?
Well, it wasn't for me because I didn't have any at that time. All my friends were in the battalion. So every time we deployed, I was with all my friends. I was single at the time. It wasn't difficult for me, but some of the guys struggled with that. Yeah, that's part of being in the military, though. This separation from family and friends.
How'd you pass the time while you were serving?
I hate to have to admit this, but I drank a lot. That's just what we did. You know, you work hard and you play hard. Danced. After I left high school and joined the Navy, my biggest discoveries in life were music, booze, and women. Sorry, no offense.
Did you or anyone in your unit get into any altercations while on active duty? If so, can you tell me about it?
Well, again, after 26 years, yeah, there were several. The most memorable was growing up as a kid. You're watching all the cowboy movies, and in every cowboy movie, there's a barroom fight. You know, so everybody I knew, all of us boys, we always grew up just couldn't wait to get into our first big barroom fight. And it happened. I was on the little island of Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and the fleet had pulled into port. And even though the island, those of us on the island were made up of some CBs and some fleeters and some crypto guys, we were all island personnel, and we all kind of knew each other, right? And then these fleet guys come in. So we're all in the club one night, and you could just feel the tension. And then all of a sudden, it's like something happened, and all the fleeters are over here, and all the island guys are over here, and we're kind of throwing insults back and forth. And then, here we go, and all of a sudden, somebody threw a beer bottle, and it was on. And the very first thing I knew, somebody cold-cocked me, and I was out for the count. My first big opportunity at a bar fight, and I got knocked out with the first punch.
How would you say your time was in Diego Garcia?
I actually loved Diego Garcia, so much so that I made 2 deployments there as a young guy from 80 and 81, and then again from 82 to 83. Relatively short deployments, 5 and 6 months, I think is what it was. But I was so captivated with the island that later, after I became the Command Master Chief, I had the opportunity to go back as the Command Master Chief of the entire island. It's just a paradise. I loved it. It's a long way from home, but it's so gorgeous.
How were you able to stay positive during your time in the military?
Oh, it was never a problem for me because I loved what I did. So, and even on the days that I was struggled, that I had some bad days, I would refer back to my very first command was Naval Air Station, South Weymouth, Boston, Massachusetts. And when I first checked on board as an E3, this E5 pulled me off to the side and says, look, every day you come to quarters with a smile on your face. He says, whether you had the worst day of your life or not, it doesn't matter. You come with a smile on your face. And you be the first one to raise your hand and say, hey, can we have an inspection today? Jimmy Belknap, I will never forget Jimmy Belknap. And his idea was positive mentality, whether you're having a bad day or not. So on my bad days, I would always think of Jimmy, and I just force myself to put a smile on my face, and that helps. Even if you're having a bad day, if you find some reason to smile, it just makes you feel better, and your day is better as a result of that. So to this day, I still think of Jimmy Belknap when I'm having a bad day.
Were you and Jimmy Belknap good friends?
Jimmy Belknap and I were great friends all through my military career, as a matter of fact. He was my mentor and my hero. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Jim.
Are you still in contact with Jimmy Belknap?
Unfortunately, no. I have lost contact with Jim. I am in contact with many of the guys, but not Jim. You know what? Now that you mention that, I feel kind of bad about that. I'm going to have to see if I can't find it.
Well, were you involved in any humanitarian acts? If so, what did you do?
Seabees typically do humanitarian work all over the world, everywhere the battalion deploys, including the detachments. We have main body deployment sites where the majority of the battalion will go, but then we send detachments all over the area. For example, we no longer go there, but when we were deploying to Puerto Rico, we would send detachments to Bermuda and Antigua and I can't remember, but assorted usually 5 or 6 other places in addition to the main body site. So on Saturdays, on our off Saturdays, we would typically go out and work with the local communities to improve schools. We would paint a school building or help them build a school building if that's what they were doing. Go to hospitals and do paint, maybe pour a sidewalk for them, whatever needed to be done. So we did a lot of humanitarian stuff.
Is there any particular humanitarian act that you liked or enjoyed the most?
Actually, no. Even though I was a construction mechanic, looking back on it, it wouldn't be my first choice. I always wanted to be a builder because those guys got all the good jobs. As a mechanic, I got up and I went to the garage every day and then I went home. But these guys, man, they got to go out all these different places and do all these different sorts of jobs. So I was really quite envious of that. So for me, just going to a school and helping them build a wall or paint or do anything outside of the turning wrenches aspect was a lot of fun for me.
Did you ever have a mission where something unexpected happened to you and you had to adapt to a new situation?
That happens all the time. I don't know if anything ever went exactly the way it was supposed to. I can't really think of any specific instance. That's part of being in the military. You just have to remain flexible all the time. Never try to be rigid. You got it. The aviation guys have a saying that flexibility is too rigid. We prefer to be fluid. And that's really kind of sums it up. You have to be just able to go any direction that you require.
Is there any other memorable assignments you had that you want to talk about now?
All of my assignments were memorable to me. I loved recruiting. Most guys don't, but I loved it because I'm a little bit of a ham. So it was an opportunity for me to be on stage and talk, and people would listen to me. I was an order writer, and what we call that in the Navy, it's called a detailer. Other services call them order writers. I was the guy, when you're ready to transfer, you would call me up on the phone and say, hey, where can I go? That was in Washington, D.C. at the time, and Washington, D.C. is such an incredible place to be. I did that for 3 years. During that time, I was able to be part of a group. I can't remember what we call the organization now, but it was the senior enlisted, I don't know. But every month we got to go to a different embassy and have meetings with their senior enlisteds. It's like all the senior enlisteds from all the embassies met once a month. And each month we would meet at a different embassy. And each month they would put on this huge spread of food from their country. It was wonderful. I love DC. I love that job. I learned more about the Navy in those 3 years I was an order writer than I had the whole 15 years prior, I think, to just serving. So it's quite memorable.
I'm aware you served in Panama. Can you tell me a bit about that?
We were there for the Panama invasion, not in a fighting capacity. Our job was to go and provide prisoner of war camps. So that's what we did. We put up concertina wire, provided shelter, and stood guard around the prisoner of war camps. Didn't really get to see a whole lot, to be honest with you, unfortunately.
What was your role during Gulf War I?
I was with Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 5, MCD 5 during that time. And we were right up front with the Marines for the duration of the war. We built what we would call an MSR, main supply road. That was our primary purpose for being there, to put roads and create roads so that the Marines could get their equipment back and forth. But we did some other stuff too. We would build bunkers for the Marines, storage facilities, and outhouses, which seems kind of funny, but it's pretty important when you're out in the middle of the desert.
What did you know about the war prior to you going to it?
Not too much, really. It all happened fairly quickly. As soon as the aggression started, we mounted out an air detachment, and those guys took off. And then we started preparing all the battalion equipment. I had spent 4 years in a cargo handling outfit in Williamsburg, Virginia, Navy Cargo Handling and Port Group, NATCHA. And so I got slated to kind of supervise the loading of the battalion equipment on board the ship. And then they put me on the ship to ride over to Saudi Arabia, and then I supervised the offload there as well. Now, that whole process was almost 2 months long, so I was kind of out of the information loop. CNN was pretty much my only source, and that was sketchy. So I really didn't know a whole lot about what was going on until the day I arrived in camp after the offload.
Were you ever frightened during deployment?
I was terrified. Um, The first night, we just completed the offload. I'd been staying on the ship during that process. And the battalion was several miles outside of camp, living in tents on the edge of this town, in the sand. And so my first night in camp, I had gone to bed, laid down on my cot. About 3 o'clock in the morning, the tent flaps got ripped open, and the watch screams inside, "Get your gear on, get your gear on, the Scuds are on the way." So because we were kind of in transit, we didn't have any bunkers, underground bunkers. There was no place for you to go. So all we could do was just get up and put on our mop gear and lay back down on the cot and wait. You had no idea if the Scuds were gonna land right in the middle of camp, or if they would land outside of camp, but we would get the gas. We just had no idea what was going on. So yeah, I was terrified just laying there waiting. That lasted for about an hour, I guess. Fortunately for us, the Scuds flew overhead. Actually, I think they were knocked out of the sky with the Patriot missile defense system that the Army had set up.
Can you clarify what a Scud is?
A Scud missile, Scud is an acronym, and I have no idea what it is, but that was the Iraqis' missile of choice to deliver weapons of mass destruction gas. So it was just a big missile loaded with a bunch of gas that they would fire in a general direction and hope it hit something. Their guidance systems weren't so good.
How did your family feel while you were deployed?
Oh, I don't really know, to be honest with you. Mail was incredibly slow. This was before the days of internet and email and Twitter and Facebook. So it literally took a month for a letter to get to us, and then a month to respond. So they were supportive, but not concerned, I don't think. They were very supportive.
What kind of food did you eat while deployed?
Well, we would have eggs, if you can call them eggs, in the morning. Hot meal in the morning before we went to work. And then MRE, are you familiar with MREs? Meal Ready Eats? Yeah, that was your lunch. And then most of the time we would have a hot meal in the evening too, if you were able to get over there to get to it. Most of us were working. Well, oftentimes you were working and had to work through the evening meal, so you'd grab an MRE later. Or the cooks would leave out fruit or something for you to munch on if you came in that after hours.
What were the conditions you were living in?
We were out in the middle of the desert. We were right at the tip of the spear. We weren't the combat tip of the spear, but we were right next to those guys. It's been so long now, I can't remember the names of the units, but we were attached to I Corps with the Marines. So we were right up front. When the walls were finally breached, it was our bulldozers that knocked down the berm so that the Marines could punch through and start the invasion.
How did the friends you made help you while you were deployed?
Oh, I guess stress relief, all the card games. It was, I don't know if it's still true, but back then we were the first group of soldiers, of military guys to go through a war and not be able to drink. So there was no alcohol. So we were drinking non-alcoholic beer, playing Uno, because we weren't allowed to play poker for whatever reason. So we were drinking non-alcohol beer, playing Uno, and you just made a joke out of it. And I remember one of my most distinct memories is the guy that slept right across from me, a great guy named Joe Conley. Every night before we go to bed, Joe and I would play Battleship for about an hour. And that was our stress relief. So we would do that, and then we'd get up in the morning and start the day all over again.
After the events of 9/11, how did you and your fellow sailors react?
There were lots of different reactions. I think everybody was a little scared. But you go in, after being in the military for so long, you just, the training kicks in. It's like anything else in a professional environment. The training kicks in, you're a little scared, the training kicks in, and then you just automatically start doing what you need to do.
Did you deploy anywhere during the War on Terror? And can you tell me about it?
Actually, I did not. I was the command on 9/11. I was the command master chief for the island of Diego Garcia, which is it's a 1-year tour, and I had already put in my retirement papers. So once 9/11 hit, I extended for 6 months. I think there was a tremendous influx of Air Force personnel on the island, and I had actually graduated from the Air Force Senior Enlisted Academy. So I volunteered to stay on the island for an additional 6 months to coordinate with the Air Force. And then, once that was done, I went ahead and retired and came back to the States.
Now I'm just going to ask you some final questions. Do you regret joining the military?
Oh, no. Not at all. That was the smartest thing I've ever done. I would do it again in a minute. And I would encourage any young person to do the same thing.
How did seeing the events you saw overseas change your outlook on life?
Growing up in Bethalto, Illinois, is a very small community. I wasn't aware of world politics or world happenings, world events, and I didn't care because it didn't, as far as I was concerned, it didn't bother me. It didn't impact me, so I had no reason to be concerned with it. Now, having been around the world more than once, I'm aware that I'm aware now of how things that happen on the other side of the world can eventually come back and impact anybody in the town of Bethalto, Illinois. It's an education. It's a tremendous education.
If you had a choice to serve again, would you?
Absolutely.
If you had to start over and rejoin the military, would you do it differently? Branch, occupation?
Yeah, in retrospect, there's always something you would do different. I love being I had the opportunity to serve on one ship for a year later in my career, and I just love being at sea. So if I had life to live over again in the Navy, I would be in some job that allowed me to ride a small ship and be at sea, because I just love being underway.
What was the one?
I'd still be in the Navy. There's only one way to go. That's the Navy, baby.
What was one of your favorite things you learned while serving?
Again, that's a pretty broad question. Communication, coordination, teamwork. Probably those are the three biggest. Coordination, cooperation, teamwork. Teamwork is by far the biggest thing I learned.
Do you ever miss certain aspects of the service, and could you explain it?
Well, I certainly miss the camaraderie, because that changes after you get out. But the biggest thing I miss were I spent two of the most incredible years of my life in Scotland. There's not a day in my life that goes by that something doesn't remind me of Scotland. So that's the most memorable event for me.
And why did you enjoy Scotland so much?
It's I don't know if I can explain that. Camaraderie, but the Scots are such wonderful people. There's so much history. I I don't know how to explain that really, but it just made a huge impact on my life. And I go back every chance I can as a result of that.
How was your life changed by the military service?
Oh, I'm much smarter. I'm a much better person now because of my time in the military. I think that's probably, I now have the ability to see the big picture in life in general. And I wasn't able to do that before. I was never taught that when I was a kid. I was only taught to look day to day. And now I look 10, 15, 20 years from now. Where do I want to be in 20 years? And I'll start planning accordingly on how to get there.
What personal challenges did joining the military help you overcome?
I'll go back to the fear of the unknown. I was petrified. And there were many times after that, the fear of the unknown came into play as well. But each time you have to face that, it gets a little bit easier. But that was the biggest challenge I had, was that the very first initial fear of the unknown, taking that first step to get on the bus that was taking me to Orlando, Florida.
What was the hardest challenge you had to overcome since leaving the military?
Oh, that's easy. When I was the command master chief of Diego Garcia, I could pick up the phone and say, I want this done and I want it done now. And about the time I would hang up the phone, I could look out the window and I could see whatever it was I wanted done starting to happen. And then the day after I retired, I picked up the phone to try to get somebody to do something, and the person on the other end of the phone said, "Who are you?" So it was a huge, huge change from being the command master chief to being nobody. Took me a while to get over that, to get past that. About a year.
How was your life after you retired from the military?
Oh, as much as I love being in the military, I love being retired as well. I've got my hands in a lot of different things. I'm a musician. I've become an artist. I didn't know I was an artist before. I love to dress up. I just returned from Venice, Carnival in Venice, designing costumes, painting masks. I've learned to sing, and I'm renovating my house. I've just recently renovated a camper. I'm always busy. There's always something to do. Going to concerts, enjoying my time off.
What was the most meaningful memory from your time in the service?
There was a time just before I left Scotland, myself and one of my roommates were in a park that's set up on very top of the hill, and the entire valley opened up below us. And my roommate looked at me and said, "You know, it's never going to be like this again." And I looked over at him and said, "Oh, sure it will. It'll be like this again. It'll be this good again." But it never was. That was one of the most unforgettable moments of my life. I'll never forget. I think about that day almost every day.
What advice would you give to young people today planning to make a living off the military?
I would say do, first of all, something you enjoy, something that you're good at, something that will help you later in life. If, for example, communications, the world will always need communications people. You can get that, and when you come in, you get that security clearance going for you, then you get that networking thing going for you. You can end up anywhere. You could end up working in the White House communications. You could end up in the State Department, you could end up in the FBI. You could end up with Secret Service. There's so many opportunities. So I would just say to choose your job wisely. Not too many positions in the civilian world for a rifleman in the infantry. It might be fun. I mean, it could be certainly challenging and exciting, but employment opportunities in the outside world aren't that great. So I would just say pick your job wisely.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Navy, baby. That's it. Go Navy, beat Army.
How was the time spent in Antarctica while you were deployed there?
Oh, I loved Antarctica. I got there through that cargo handling outfit that I was attached to in Williamsburg, Virginia. Well, we would go down, we were attached to the, can't exactly remember the name, the Naval Antarctic Research Program or something to that effect. We would go down and offload their supplies for them every year. And that involved flying from Williamsburg, Virginia to Port Hueneme, California, where the ship was located. Then we would fly down to New Zealand, and that was my first experience in New Zealand, and then fly from there down to the ice and do the offload. It's just an amazing experience. The best part for me was the second time I did that, they flew me and 5 other guys down to New Zealand to ride the ship, so that as we were pulling into McMurdo Sound, we could start breaking down all the lashings on all the deck loaded stuff, so we could immediately start offloading the ship as soon as we tied up to the pier. Well, when we got to Christchurch, New Zealand, the dock workers, the local stevedores, had been on strike for 2 weeks, and they were on strike for 2 more weeks, and then it took them 2 weeks after they went back to work to finish loading the ship. So we had the opportunity to spend a whole month in Christchurch, New Zealand on Liberty, waiting for the ship to load up. So that was a great time. But man, being on the ice is unlike anything you'll ever experience. It's so quiet and peaceful, and everybody, it's just a big family. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place.
Any final words?
Go Navy, beat Army.